Perfect. Okay, everybody, can you all hear me? All good? Perfect. So welcome to the very first theater session. I know it's been confusing some people what the format is, so we're going to take a couple of minutes to go through what all of this means, and then we'll get into the meat of it. So as you may remember, in 2015, the CWC conducted a member survey. And from that survey, we were able to identify some primary factors in order to increase member satisfaction. Those two factors were members wanting to feel more like they are a part of the organization, and they want us to show them how we are protecting their interests. What we took from that is that we need to be able to include our members more. So we developed what we call the CWC Strategic Plan. And the strategic plan has 5 key areas: policy development and advocacy, education and networking, finance management, governance, and finally, communications and partnerships. I'm sure you've been hearing us talk a lot about communications over the last few months, and it's really become the focus for at least the last year. We've been developing our communications area. As a result of that, last month we sent out a member survey. From that survey, based on communications, we found that members feel that the frequency of our communications are great, the detail in our communications are great, the platforms that we are currently using are great, and what we mean by platforms are things like our summer conference, or our e-news, or emails, or workshops and webinars, and we can go into more detail on that later. The next step, though, is establishing what the content of these communications need to be. And that's what the purpose of these theater sessions are to help us drive the content for our communications for the next year or two. So what does that mean? We'll start off with these theater sessions. From the survey, we are listening to what you have told us are key issues in your eyes. We will take what happens today from our discussion and present it to our board at our board meeting in September, where they will sort of filter through everything that we collect today and establish what those key priorities are for the CWC going forward. And finally, as we develop the communications plan, we will identify and incorporate those issues into that plan. So what does that mean for today? I know we've had a lot of questions about what this all means. We have 3 rooms, Corbell 1, 2, and 3. Each room has 2 sessions, an early session and a late session. And in each session, we will listen to a discussion on 2 key issues. But no room is listening to the same key issue. But don't worry, we are recording all these sessions, so if you feel like you missed out on an issue, if there was an issue that you wanted to listen to, the recordings will be available probably starting next week. And as you can see, we have supposed to be 3 speakers that will address these issues as we go on. So the session format, what we're looking for is to answer 3 key questions today. We're going to show you 4 issues. And we're going to decide if this is really an actual issue for the CWC to work on. So the first step is presenting the information on that specific issue, deciding whether it is an actual issue, and whether it's something that the CWC should communicate to you about, and whether, taking a step back, we're even the right organization to work on that specific issue. Maybe there's a different organization that's better equipped to handle that particular topic. And don't worry, once again, all these sessions are being recorded, and we will provide other opportunities for feedback on each individual issue. Do we have any questions so far before we get started? It's a bit complicated, but once we get going, it should clear up. Seeing no questions, our first issue of the day, based on the member survey, is water court cases. What this means is water court cases what is identified as one of the top 3 issues that members want to hear about from the Water Congress. The other 2 being ballot initiatives and water administration. Specifically, members identified certain topics within this issue of water court cases that they want us to communicate about. They include latest on water court cases at district and state levels, summaries of Colorado Supreme Court decisions and their implications, updates on state engineer policies, current cases, and related legislation, whether there are any new threats pending, and whether there are any changes in law. People really want to be kept informed and as up to date as possible on anything related to water court cases.
You ready?
I'm ready.
Good. All right. Well, let me start out by asking you for a show of hands. How many thought that we were actually going to be talking about water court cases today, rather than communications about water court cases?
Okay, I did, because I was I was panicked.
All right, slow response there. Now, if it does slow down, we will join hands and change the subject to bacon. So that may be a carrot or a stick in your mind, but one way or another, we'll see if that can help us move this along. We will try to engender some good discussion here. So let me ask you again, with a show of hands, how many of you actually responded to and participated in the 2017 member survey? I'm going to call that almost half the room.
Yeah,
Not bad.
that's good.
Not
that's
bad.
good. Should we introduce ourselves?
Oh, heck no.
Oh, all right.
Hi, I'm Rick Fendel. And this is Laura.
Laura Chartrand. We're supposed to engender trust with the group so that we can get their feedback. So.
She's much better at that than I am. Okay, so we've got, about half of you actually participated. How many of you, of those who did not participate, let me ask you the survey question. Is what's going on in water court something that the Colorado Water Congress ought to be communicating with its members about? Those of you who did not participate. Anybody? Got a yes? Show of hands. Thank you. Good. Oh yeah. All right. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. For those of you who did, is this a topic that you said yes to? Show of hands. Good. Okay. When in the survey, they talked about different means of communications, and the ones that came out as popular, and again, I'll ask you for show of hands whether we agree on this or not in the room, our conferences, email, the Water Congress website, webinars, e-news, not so popular, YouTube and TwitFace. Are we generally in agreement? Anybody got something to say about one of those? Okay, those are the platforms we like, or we'd prefer something else. A magazine, a newsletter, a personal phone call from Doug.
Is the court judge going to tweet his results to us?
Good question. Probably not from Pueblo, where they're Democrats and they don't tweet as much. Maybe from Greeley. That's a good question, John, because if we are going to communicate out from Water Congress about what's going on in Water Court, somebody has to provide that information in to Water Congress. Somebody has to trigger a communication with a question, with a suggestion, with I'm in this case and this is going on. How do you see this working? Mark?
I was going to say it's more how you see it than where you see it. I think a process has an actual, the layout of the facts and the process for how things are might be more beneficial than I don't care. Doug calls me or not. All he says tells me what I need to know.
Okay.
So the content of the communication is more important than the format?
So what do you want to hear? Do you have a preferred subtopic?
I'm non-biased report of what the bills are, or whatever is being reported, and then I think even just the way it's, if it's an email or it's kind of the checkbox approach, I guess is what I would say. Here's the things that need to be laid out about the current bill of this town.
Shani, are we getting the sound? We don't have microphones for the audience today.
If you want to share, we can get one of your mics for the
Yes,
questions.
we can do that.
All right, let's do that. Let's do that.
If you're okay with sharing.
We're okay with it.
We're good.
I'm wondering, Rick, before we talk a little bit more about format, if we could talk a little bit about what is it that you want to know? I know that Rick and I got an email and there was a whole laundry list about water court issues. And at least I kind of paused and was like, oh my God, how much am I going to have to study for this presentation? And like, am I going to be talking about the latest water court cases? And there were some interesting survey results which indicated that you wanted to flush out ongoing cases. And we were a little mystified on what that would look like. I think as attorneys and engineers, you really can't spill before there's a decision in the case. So I'm wondering, for those of you who are comfortable, what is it that you would like to see Water Congress communicate about the water court system? Is it really an all of above, or are there some priorities you would like to see?
I'm curious about the scope of the issues, like how many cases are there a year, you know, and then if I was going to say which ones I want to know about, you know, the ones that are really impacting Grand Junction, Colorado, you know, this would be the first ones I want to know about.
What impacts me, basically? How do we get to that? Ideas? If you had a water court case going that, you know, had issues coming up that might be of general interest to the Water Congress membership, would you be willing to provide a tip, provide a summary, suggest somebody ought to come and check the file here and see this because this is interesting? And, you know, when we get an answer to this question, it's going to affect a lot of people. Yeah.
Well, I think the Supreme Court has had some big rulings in the last couple of years. So following the Supreme Court and any rulings that they have or pivotal cases there, the water bar associations also, I think, are a great resource for Water Congress, just as a resource of what's going on. So I think if you guys keep touch with the different water bars across the state for different divisions or just the water bar in general, that would be a great place to start on what's going to impact the water court.
Good point. So let me ask one more show of hands. How many water lawyers in the room? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So we apparently have a lot of people in the room who are interested in this topic, and you're probably not members of the water law section of the Colorado Bar Association, which is one organization that does get out information about cases, particularly new Supreme Court cases. So we're seeing a need. You know, if we're going to talk about what's going on in court and what's going on in cases, just the presence here in the room tells us it's not just addressed to the lawyers. So maybe the Bar Association can help, but the Bar Association is not the answer. Remember, one of Doug's questions is the Water Congress the right organization to do this? Is the Water Congress the right organization to do this? Are there others that might be useful for this? Do the engineers have organizations for this? Mark?
Well, I guess, do we have is there any place with Colorado Water Congress right now that there's any kind of summary? I mean, I guess the water bar would not be where I would go. I'm a Georgia redneck. I need stuff in very simple terms with respect to the water court. And I guess for me, it's not just water court, it's what's going on with water legal issues and changes to how water court cases might go. So I wouldn't be looking for cases that are ongoing. I'd be looking for results that might have an impact and be summarized in a very simple manner. So, I don't know. A couple of sentences would be great.
Very helpful. We had a water lawyer once who could explain things in plain English, but we ran him out of town pretty quickly.
He's in Georgia.
Anybody else? Are there other organizations that could be doing this or that could be helpful to helping Water Congress do this? Engineers?
The Division of Water Resources is a great
Division of
resource as
Water
well,
Resources.
because they're the ones administering a lot of what's being decided in Water Court. But I think Water Congress is a great place to distribute that information and provide, it's hard to say a non-biased opinion, but maybe both sides or maybe three sides. You get different people to write what they see as a ruling or how this ruling came about and how that's going to impact it. So whether it's through webinars, where you can have that forum and that discussion and presentations. I'd love everything to be really simple, but I don't think Water Court is ever simple. So I think, but getting that information out, and I think Water Congress is a great place to do that.
So when Rick and I were prepping and talking to Doug and Shanae, it's parsing out whether Water Congress should dedicate a lot of resources behind Water Court rulings, or is it sufficient to connect the membership with ongoing things? Whether it's presentations by DWR, whether it's what the Bar Association's doing, what is the engineering associations. So by a show of hands, how many of you would be satisfied with Water Congress promoting what exists currently in this arena? Okay,
Corner maybe?
So by a show of hands, right, so by a show of hands, how many of you have an expectation that Water Congress could do a little bit more than just connecting you with what's going on? Okay.
What do we think that would look like? I talked about the problem of how we get the information into Water Congress. What does that look like in terms of what is, obviously Shanae and Emily can't go sit in Water Court and listen to trials or even go review the files and say, all right, here's what's going on. So we need communication in to spark communication out. What does that look like? John?
Rick, this sounds like information overload. You've got resumes that are published in every basin. You've got referee rulings, all of the stuff that goes on with stipulations and negotiations and cases. I rely upon my water attorneys to tell me what's going on. It's just too much information. And I'm not sure that there's enough staff in Water Congress to even begin to tackle this problem. This is like a half a dozen people. And that may be not enough.
Is it a committee of volunteers?
Oh, Lord. It's a daunting task. And, you got to go to the Water Court to get stuff, and I don't know. It's a challenge.
Let me volunteer a piece in response to that.
I think she wants to make a comment.
No, I don't.
Thank you, John. Let me suggest something in response to that and to Mark's comment as well, which is give me results. In the survey, there was a question about, do you prefer communications on an ongoing basis, addressing issues and progress as things move forward? And it seems to me that's that got a lot of positive response in the survey. And it seems to me that makes a lot of sense for things like ballot issues. That makes a lot of sense for policy issues. To me, that doesn't make a lot of sense for Water Court. And in part, as Mark said, as the consumer of the information, maybe it's not so useful. I look at it from the flip side as a participant in Water Court. I have this nightmare scenario in mind where I do a Wednesday webinar for the Water Congress over the lunch hour about the issues in my case that are of general interest, and by Friday I have 3 motions to intervene with new objectors. And I'm pretty sure, 1, that's the last webinar I would ever do on that sort of thing, and 2, it might be the last case I ever do for that client, because I'd have to answer the question of why that happened to me. So I tend to, I think, just from the flip side of that, as a participant, I'm not going to go out and say, here's what's going on in my case and publicize that to the world. But I would be happy to talk about the result. I would be happy if I have a case, maybe to say, all right, I'm going to email Shanae, is this something we should write up? Now, is that going to work? Is that enough? Does that get us? It leads to, unfortunately, the court system doesn't give us, systematic. There are 8 bits of useful information or case results or rulings every quarter. It's more episodic than that. It's more ad hoc than that. It strikes me this is likely to be an ad hoc kind of communication rather than you're going to get a monthly or a quarterly or even a semi-annual summary.
And I wonder, during the summer and then the annual conference, if perhaps there could be a panel conversation about the seminal cases that perhaps have taken place in the past 6 months. Is that a way to communicate some of those key holdings, especially for those of you who attend on a regular basis? That way it's there, you get to hear from maybe the practitioners who argued those cases or folks who are knowledgeable about the water court process. Would that satisfy? Would that be a way to convey that information?
I would definitely love to go to those, and I would definitely, I would feel like that would be a great way to get that information, but for those of us who don't get to go to all of the conferences, it would be great if, I'm sure a lot of these are distributed in some sort of webcast or something afterwards, but if that could be available afterwards so that if I couldn't attend, I could still get that information.
Other thoughts about it?
I guess I might be the outlier here, but it seems to me that most of us that are here belong to organizations that have legal teams that make us aware of court decisions that affect what's in it for me. And I certainly am. I know what decisions come down, and I am made aware of this is important. I'm usually made aware that it's going to be important depending on how it goes. So it appears to me that this is a solution without a problem.
Others feel that. Part of what we're doing here is trying to wrap up with the question: is this a topic Water Congress should pursue, perhaps devote some resources to? So I'm here.
If you guys are going to be a champion of this cause, then you need to be a champion. It can't be one way or the other, and so which means that the content has to be really good content, and like you said, majority of entities have legal teams and trusted advisors. So even if Mark reads something from Water Congress about it, he's still going to go ask his attorneys. And so I guess I don't really know where that leaves us as far as whether there's a problem or a solution, whether there's actually something that needs to be solved. So.
Thoughts?
And I think staff at Water Congress identified, they struggled because this was one of the top 3 issues that the membership identified as an opportunity for Water Congress to have a place. And the struggle is, to your point, if you're going to be that person and you need to be all in, and someone else made the point, you're going to have to staff up to that. And so you're going to either have to go to membership and say, hey, maybe there's dues increase to help support that. I'm sure people won't be a fan of that. That's not my suggestion, by the way. But that's how you get there, right? To staff that up. Or that they shift from where they are now and give up and walk away from an arena that they are staffing up. And I don't know, I'm getting a sense of maybe you all are sending a message that maybe that is no longer one of the top 3 priorities that you see Water Congress serving. But there were a group of you who said you wanted them to do more than just communicate what other organizations were doing when it came to educating folks about water court decisions. So I'm wondering if we could hear from you. Yes, in the back.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I think my perspective might be a little bit unique. I am new into special districts, having just joined one in the Southwest Denver metro area. And my background was actually, I was with, for many years, the American Water Works Association, and came from that nonprofit side of things. And so when I came into this role, we kind of sit and look at all the water organizations and say, okay, what role does each of them fill, and how does that benefit me? And I've been with AWWA, I've been with WEF, and a lot of that is the true practitioners. So we talk about the technical issues, the regulatory issues, sort of that, how do you run a treatment plant, the distribution systems and collection systems. And I've always looked at Water Congress as more of a legal and policy group. And so as I have that perspective and look at how I might get information, I am not one of those groups who has legal counsel on staff. We have 14 people in my special district. We contract operate 5 other special districts that some of them only serve 100 connections. And so I think there's a challenge here between serving probably all the different types of memberships that Water Congress has. You have everything from Denver Water and Metro and the bigger utilities down to the smaller ones like mine that still find value in Water Congress because of these things, and that we would look to this group to provide us with information on these court cases, or it may not be directly connected to what we do, but we watch what happens at Denver Water, we watch what happens at Metro and Littleton Inglewood to see how that tweaks. We don't have the ability to join all the different water organizations that are out there, the Water Bar, all those. And so for us, sort of the perspective that we come into Water Congress with is we look to that group for policy and legal information. And however that comes to us, we find it incredibly valuable.
So I'm a little confused. Are we talking just water court level cases, or are we talking Supreme Court cases?
It's a good question. And I think that in the survey, there's a little bit of mixed up and some question about both, but the focus is on what's going on in water courts. The Supreme Court publishes its opinions, and we all hear about those. Those are the ones that our lawyers tell us about. I think we're talking more about what's bubbling up through the system in water court.
Well, I guess I disagree a little bit that we all hear about the Supreme Court cases. And I think that might be a role for Water Congress there, is maybe a spot on your webpage, here are the latest water cases that have come out, or something to that effect. I agree that the water court level, that's pretty daunting unless you've got some good volunteers. But I always thought Water Congress could do a little bit better about advertising the Supreme Court cases that do come out.
Thank you. Other comments? I think we finished it.
I think Shanae will let us know.
We have a comment.
Another comment. Oh, we have another.
I don't envy you, especially when you end up looking out around the room, the diversity of people, the diversity of backgrounds, and the diversity of informational needs. I think if you're a member of a special district that has attorneys that provide information, it's a different level. I identify the guy in the back from a farm ranch. most of the legalese goes right over the top of my head, and some of the stuff that comes out, even from Water Congress, is like, what in the world was that? So I think you have a wide variety, but I agree with Jennifer. I think, there's a real need for, the things that affect me and my ditch, my irrigation, is something that, I don't know if you don't have attorneys that are giving you that information. Somewhere you need to be able to get feedback and get that. And so I think there is a role, but I think it's a limited role, and you've got to really look at who's the audience and how are you trying to, and I think a lot of the stuff, the attorney stuff, can be handled with attorney. But I think there's a lot of stuff that can be filtered down that, if it's affecting how I run my ditch, I want to know about it.
And it perhaps, and don't feel bad for Rick and I, because we're not the ones who have to implement the suggestions that come out of these theater sessions. So, okay, good, because he was like, he feels bad. I think that I like the idea personally of advertising the Supreme Court cases, and to your point, it can be a box on the webpage that here's an opinion, and a link to the actual opinion, and see, maybe this is a baby step process to see if there's value to members from that point of view, and see if there's more ideas that come from that. And that could be a low burden for Water Congress staff to start there.
Baby steps.
Baby steps.
I'm wondering if you guys have implemented any analytics, because when I'm thinking about, when you hearing about all the diverse groups, the first thing I think of is subscriber groups and the ability to gauge the interest on a given topic. So, for example, if Supreme Court cases are of interest to me, and then I subscribe to that part of and that at least allows Water Congress to gauge the level of interest. And then from the perspective of historically, there's Google Analytics and other things that could be done to just see, who actually clicks on these things, and do they spend 1 minute? Do they spend half an hour, kind of thing? I mean, so I guess I would encourage, it's that kind of effort.
Do we have any last questions? Okay, well, thank you, Rick and Laura. That was wonderful. Thank you. Floyd, would you like to join us on stage?
Am I here?
You're here. As a precursor to introducing our very next issue, which is ballot initiatives. So thank you everyone for bearing with us. This is a format we're testing. We've never done this before. We're really trying to listen to our members as much as we can and drive that content and specify it to what it is that you want to hear. So as I mentioned earlier, Floyd's stairs are over here if you need them. Ballot issues were one of the top 3 issues that were identified as most important from the member survey, along with water court cases, which we just listened to, and water administration. Specifically from the survey, it sounds like we want to hear more on alerts on what's going on and what initiatives are out there. And similarly to comments that have been made regarding water court cases, we want to see what the CWC is doing regarding those proposed initiatives. Do we provide summaries and analyses on what's out there? And finally, what positions are we taking on those initiatives? What reports are we putting forward? And what are our recommendations regarding those initiatives? So before we dive into that, our famous question is, did you know? Unlike water court cases where we currently do not have a lot of information on our website, we've really done a lot of work when it comes to ballot initiatives, specifically with regard to the Colorado Water Stewardship Project. If you go to our website, we've now created under advocacy a specific page where you can find all information regarding proposed ballot initiatives. When you go to that page, the first thing you'll see and it'll be better once you do it on your own devices, but is a brief overview of what is currently on the ballot. And for right now, that means the 2017-2018 elections. And under that, we're posting clips on any kind of webinar or workshop that we are putting forward regarding initiatives. All of that is available. With regard to the individual specific initiative, if you go to their individual pages, we have been doing summaries on what those initiatives mean. So you can find all information regarding those specific broad topics on those pages. Under that, you'll find the status. What that means is, where is that initiative in the process? So we update that daily. And finally, so as not to reinvent the wheel, we redirect you under the information section to current existing documents regarding each individual initiative. So what that means is, if you want to read the actual title board report, you can click, or read even the text of the actual measure, you can click on those individual links and it'll redirect you to the General Assembly page where you can access all of those documents. And finally, the last thing we have on our page is the proposed ballot initiative status sheet. And this is a new work product that we've developed in the last few months, where we list every single initiative as it's proposed, provide you the status, the dates, who the proponents are, and links to any Supreme Court actions pending on those initiatives. So we're really providing a lot of information. And if you have noticed, recently with regards to communications, we've been providing one e-news every Wednesday, every single week. And what we're trying to do is include a section regarding the Stewardship Project on those e-news, so that you can get the information sent directly to you regarding what is going on with the Stewardship Project. We've also done webinars. The esteemed gentleman to my left is a very active player in those webinars, providing all that information. We also have networking opportunities, and I might take advantage of this to pass it to Floyd if you want to go into any detail regarding that.
Okay. Hello, everybody. What I passed out was an e-news. For those of you who haven't saw it, and it's it also, I included, I thought a good, very good editorial piece from Doug on the waters of the U.S., and then a final piece that I do on my website on infrastructure. Or to sum it up, that the Water Stewardship Project is really an effort to both increase information, and as you can see from Sinead's review of the website, which is really relatively new. In other words, this year it's really been increased a great deal. There's an effort to provide more information, but also to give you a bit of an advocacy edge, that is to say, to be trying to address public policy issues that are important to you. The questions that Doug and the conference are trying to resolve is, what do you need to know? What came out of the survey was that probably maybe the number one issue, but very, very highly ranked, was your interest in ballot issues. And as you know, there's a lot of them right now, but it's harder to get on the ballot these days. It could be referred by the legislature, but to go through the initiative process is much more difficult because of the new limitation amendment. Nonetheless, the level of interest in ballot issues seemed to be very, very strong from the 260 some odd people like yourselves that responded to that survey. So that was one of our main goals in this. That e-news I gave you was something that was done back in March 28th. And as you can see, it's sort of listed right at the beginning, the ballot issues that were current at that time. One of the things that I'll end with this and pass on the mic, but one of the things of about these ballot issues is that we got started primarily because we were very concerned about public trust. As you know, that would really upend and dramatically change all of our water legal relationships and also how we manage water and how we invest in water. It would be incredibly disruptive. And that got our attention. And so we organized the Water Stewardship Project. And this was about 4 years ago or so. But now it's sort of evolved because the ballot issues that we are looking at today, some of them are all about empowerment of local government in areas that would control water at the local level. They might be talking about environmental quality. They might be just talking about water as a natural resource and that we have control over it. And if you are a utility or an organization that depends upon stability and sort of regulatory rationality in terms of water, then you are concerned and interested in those issues. Some you might be in favor of, but in general, you're going to be very interested in it. So there's public trust, then there's this sort of middle ground of questions that are related to water. Very good, we have a little slide there. And then finally, there are others. In somewhere between related to water and others might be ballot initiatives related to the severance tax, which we depend upon the severance tax. And there's a lot of groups today look at that and say, gosh, there's a tax we haven't changed in a long time. There's a tax that is dedicated to some traditional areas. Wouldn't it be wonderful to put that into the environment? Or if you remember, there was a ballot issue a ways back to put it into higher education. Or it's potential that we could have a ballot issue that we would suggest put it into more fully, to raise it a bit, not quite to Wyoming's level, but to raise it a bit and put it into water. So I expect a lot of action in the area of potentially severance tax or maybe ballot issues in general. And then finally is other. If you're a government entity, you might be interested in anything related to Tabor. That may not be something you think that this organization ought to be worried about, and that is changes in the Tabor law to, say, relax it, for example, or some other initiatives, minimum wage or other things that could affect you as an operating entity out there. That might not be something the Water Congress ought to do, but you want to know about it, and so that's another issue, slightly afield, but at the moment I would say we are somewhere between very obviously involved and interested in public trust and these new sort of more amorphous, somewhat more ambiguous initiatives, but that we think would have a serious effect on water. So let me stop with that. See if we want to add something here from you folks.
Yes, thank you.
Floyd, I think one of the things we're looking for, as you outlined this very well, the things we've been trying to do, and with our staff capabilities, and you all know that we have limited staff, like everybody else, and you have to decide, back to that word, priorities. What are we going to do? Where do we spend those resources? And that's one of the reasons we're here today, and would like your thoughts on that. You got an idea of what we are doing. Of course, one of the things we want to know is, what do you think we should be doing differently? Are we doing too much? Should we be doing more? There's always more, but you know what's practical, and what are the on these issues, which are really a whole gamut of importance to water providers and people who are members of the Water Congress. How do you want us to how should we be looking at this in terms of detail? If what we're providing, is that pretty good, or do we need to change it? Do we need to tweak it? And so those, just to follow up a little bit on Floyd. Alex, you want to add anything?
I think you covered it. Thank you.
Alex, would you mind kind of giving an overview of the legal action sort of perspective involved with the Stewardship Project?
So with the Stewardship Project, historically, legally, the Water Congress has worked on title setting. because many of you are public entities, and public entities cannot use money to support or oppose an initiative. So we have tried to be very respectful of that line. But one of the things that public entities or membership organizations like the Colorado Water Congress with public entities as members can do is ensure that there is a fair and accurate title setting. And that process goes through the title setting board, who has to review the entire initiative and make sure that that language that appears on your ballot accurately reflects the entire initiative and what it does, because most people read that language on their ballot, they don't read the entire text of the initiative. And also that language, or that the initiative encompasses a single subject, because no initiative can have multiple different subjects out of fear that people might be torn of, you want to vote for this one but not for that one, what do we do? So the Water Congress has historically been very involved in that for these public trust initiatives, and I think Floyd did an excellent job of talking about where those lie. There are other initiatives, such as last year's Initiative 71, which talked about what are the signature requirements for getting an initiative on the ballot. And Water Congress monitored that, but didn't play as active a role as some of these other organizations. So that's that partnership type of a thing. And we have on multiple occasions, I should say, when the title setting board sets a title that we believe is inappropriate, there's a remedy of going to the Colorado Supreme Court and seeing and challenging that title setting and challenging that title. So that's the range of issues or the range of legal alternatives or legal venues that the Water Congress can and has pursued.
And that's sort of reflected on this slide that I have on the screen right now. There are many different ways that the CWC and specifically staff, because again, we are very limited, can handle the issue of ballot initiatives. Right now, there is no ballot initiative sort of threatening, if you will, the water community, and there's nothing sort of related to the public trust. So at the moment, we're taking a more passive approach and just monitoring and scanning what's out there and providing you that information. The more related to the water community it gets, the more information we provide, whether that's just through the tracking sheet, through e-news, webinars, or our conferences. We're trying to get that up-to-date information to you as quickly as we can. But the more in-depth we get, or the more related to water and ballot initiative gets, then there's the question of how active do we become, or how active does the special project need to get, and what does that entail? And the big question that we've been dealing with as a committee for the last few months has revolved around funding. And Floyd and Steve, would you like to take that?
You see, as you move down that list there, and we haven't really been down that list too far, I think since maybe 2014. I'm trying to think of the year that we got the most active, and we then urged you to sign resolutions, and we ended up with about 20 or 30 resolutions. We partnered with those groups that were opposing some fracking and other initiatives on the ballot, so that we had beyond what we can do, we had a group that was campaigning to actually oppose a host of things that were moving toward the ballot. And fortunately, we got sort of lucky, and it was all more or less called off by an agreement between the governor and Congressman Polis and others. But as you can see, you go down that list, what we always are doing, and Sinead takes the lead on it, is monitoring. And then, as she pointed out, she tracks and produces a document if it's of a higher level of interest, and just generally communicate. But if it is a very intense issue, then it would be a higher level of communication. There's the research, potentially networking with other organizations that would oppose it, legal actions, as was pointed out, and then, quote, the full effort. And full effort would be what we did did back in 2014, and that is really try to activate you and alert you, and also get together with somebody that has money and resources and that can campaign. And that line there that says funding decisions, someplace in there we maintain an amount of money, let's say $40,000 or $50,000 on an annual basis that can do everything above funding decisions. But at that point, we would have to say, this is going to be a big issue. You are endangered by it. You are certainly involved with it. You need to be engaged with it. And at that point, we would come to you and say, we need additional resources. Back in 14, we probably had maybe $150,000 as opposed to just 50, because that's the kind of effort that you're involved with when you're communicating a great deal more. Anything else on that, sir?
The only thing I'll add, Floyd, is on the funding thing. We have been able to internalize, if you will, within our existing staff, the top 2 or 3 items pretty well. But information gathering, putting together information on the website and that sort of thing. But when it comes down to going to the title board, it comes down to going to the Supreme Court, if it's significant enough, that's real money. And one of the reasons we try to keep a fund, as Floyd mentioned, is time comes, you don't have time to make go out and raise money initially a lot of times for the first offense. You need to be able to move. So that's one of the reasons for trying to keep a balance, if you will. And of course, it's difficult to for a lot of our members to contribute to that without a specific issue to talk to their boards, to talk to their management about why are we doing this. And so that's it's out there for everyone. The stewardship project is voluntarily funded specifically for this program. And one of the questions we asking ourselves is, okay, if this year we don't have a crisis issue, logically we're not going to get as much response in terms of maintaining that fund. By the time if we have a crisis issue show up next year, that will require more financial support, then how do we make sure that we have those resources available on a timely basis before situation maybe gets beyond us? And so that's just one of the things we struggle with. And I'm going to throw out, anybody has any ideas, we're very interested in how to deal with it. It's a difficult problem.
Can I just add one quick thing? Just one thing to note, everybody's talked about, well, there really haven't been any crisis issues this year, and that is correct. However, one of the things we have seen historically is because of all the processes for the initiatives, people don't just come up with one initiative to do something. They word the same thing 4 different ways, 5 different ways. So it's very rare that we see one public trust initiative in an election cycle. You see none, or you see 5, 10, 20. And I just want to leave that out there so everybody understands.
That's a great point. And actually that is reflected on our website as well. When you go to that page, the initiatives that are sort of the similar initiatives with different language are sort of filed under the same category. And then when you go to that specific category, you'll find information on each individual specific initiative. So all of that information is available. And again, what we're trying to do is establish communication-wise, how much more do we do, how much less do we do regarding ballot initiatives? What is it about this project, and how much about this project that you want to hear from us? So do we have any questions regarding this issue? or the project or anything in general?
I mean, that's sort of the fundamental question is, one, do you want about the amount of information you're getting? Do you want more information? As I mentioned, the survey said it was one of your top topics, the Water Congress membership. And secondly, how do you want us to get it to you? We've been putting it in e-news. It's obviously on the website, but are there, we need it more frequently, less frequently? Are there some other techniques that we ought to use?
I think you covered my point pretty well, Floyd. It's really, tell us what you think. That's what we want to hear.
No questions?
We're not perfect, we know that.
Oh, come on, I'm a lawyer. I can talk about the latest water court cases, or you don't want to hear all that.
We could link arms and talk about bacon.
That's right.
Well, I'm a lawyer too, so I really like the e-news that's been coming out. And that's a big change I saw from when I went to Washington, D.C. and came back after 3 years. And I really appreciated that because it helped keep me up to date on what Water Congress was doing and what some of the issues are. And I don't know how many people are aware of this stewardship project. And it sounds like you guys have been just rolling with this in the last few months. Is that right? Or has it been a couple years?
A few years.
As I mentioned, it started probably, I'm sort of short behind that podium. It started, I think, about 4 years ago or so when there was a public trust initiative on the ballot. We started with a survey. We started at a summer conference just like this. And obviously, we were really, really attentive. And we spent that fall producing sort of the first e-newses and the first webinars, very focused on that particular initiative. Since then, as I mentioned to you in I guess it was 14, when we had a whole slew of initiatives, we were also quite active. At the moment, probably the e-news, the webinar we did this year, what Shanae has done on the website is really the level of communication. But you're right. The one thing I would say about the e-news is it's relatively new. A decision was made. We have a big committee on communication, and it's sort of the number one strategic goal of the Water Congress is to improve and increase communication. And while that committee is doing planning and what do we call it now, frameworking, they're creating a framework. We decided sort of simultaneously, the staff and Doug, to really step up the current potential communication, and one of them was e-news. And so, and you indicated in the poll that was along with this conference, probably just about one of the best, along with an email, but it was one of the best ways to communicate with you. And we're interested if that's correct. I mean, do most of you see the e-news? Because if you don't, we need to get you on the website because you're obviously members and you're coming to this conference. And that's probably the primary way we're communicating at the moment, except for more passive ways like you go to the website.
Or webinars.
And we've been doing webinars, which by and large on a variety of topics, not obviously just this, but we had one on the legislature, which is of a lot of interest to folks. We'll have 100 people on it, which is pretty good for a small organization with a lot of busy people.
Do we have any other questions? Yes?
The work that Water Congress does on ballot issues, the things that we've seen coming on the ballot since the 2014 public trust is one of the most important functions, I believe, that this organization has. And in the early days, there was a lot going on in 2014. And it was kind of hard to figure out for the rest of us who weren't involved in it what's going on. It's funding is something we'll probably be talking about. Communication, we've started now. Clearly, the work that Alex and Steve Lenhart do in the legal arena, that Floyd does in the political arena, is absolutely critical. But of course, they don't do it for fun. We pay them to do that. You know, I like my job, but I wouldn't do it if I didn't get paid for it. But this I think is something that we ought to want, you know, to hear about and just to see, because there's a lot of member dollars going to work here, doing something that is absolutely critical to our industry. And you know, whether we consider our industry to be the private part or the public part of the water world, you know, this is one that, you know, has to stay very high on our radar, has to stay very high in our survey responses, and needs to be a priority that we all ought to be paying attention to. And you know, the e-news, I gather, is helpful, although I don't get it. I'd like to be on the list. I mean, it's, you know, we need to follow this, and we need to know what's going on, and then turn around and use the information out in the community, because what really matters when we're fighting these things is how the public reacts to it, God help us if one of these things actually gets on the ballot and there's going to be a vote on it. But organizing and activating Water Congress membership will be one of the key things that happens if we do in fact have to mobilize for some of these really disruptive things that are threatening to be on the ballot sometime. They're going to get through that gauntlet that they have to go through one of these times. So, you know, the more you're up to speed on it for each attempt that happens and fails, the better prepared we all are for when that one gets through and makes it on the ballot.
Let me follow up on that real fast, and then Tom, I'll let you go. Just in terms of the last, this sort of goes to both of you, both you and Rick and Jennifer. 2014 was a learning year for us. I think that really was one of the first years where an initiative had jumped through the title setting process. We'd filed on the Supreme Court, and one of the reasons that the Stewardship Project formed was because we wanted a mechanism, or there were people in the water community who wanted a mechanism for challenging this initiative, and the Water Congress ran into the fact of the Fair Campaign Practices Act doesn't let a public membership organization do that kind of advocacy. And so that's sort of how this came across. And it is not part of, and I guess I should really make this clear, the Stewardship Project is separate and apart from the Water Congress, so that nobody's membership dues go into the Stewardship Project. And it is funded totally separately. So that it's something that is really unique, and it was how do we communicate? How do we help build this community? How do we enable the water community to become active in support or against an initiative? And that was one of the ways that came out of it. On the other hand, do we have some work to do? Probably. And the e-news and some other things are further ways of communicating. And so part of this is we'd like to hear how we can improve and how we can communicate this better, because as Rick said, community activism is really important. Most voters probably don't understand what is a public trust, and part of our job is to help educate them.
Yes, I want to compliment Colorado Water Congress Stewardship Program. I don't think you get enough positive accolades, but I'd like to just give you a round of applause, because I think you guys did the right thing. Yes, you may need to improve, but good job.
Thank you. Do we have one more question?
So the e-newsletter, is that for members only?
It generally is. If you let us know that you are interested, we can sign you up for it, and you should be able to get it. It's part of the focus of the last year, as we mentioned earlier, has been communications, and we've been developing ways to communicate to our members. The e-news has been by far one of the most useful tools. There are some kinks with it, so we're playing with it. We're developing a consistent format. We're doing everything that we can, but you do need to be a member of the CWC as an organization to then get on that list. So if you're not on that list, please let us know, and we will make sure that you are added.
Any thought about making an event available to the general public?
We are open, absolutely. We're open to ideas and trying to rethink that.
So all you would have to do is go to the website and sign up for it that way, or is it a phone call?
Send us an email or give us a call. Right now it's kind of done through a separate software program, so it's not actually something you just sign up for on the website. And that's something we're actually considering on amending going forward and evaluating these communications tools, is finding simpler ways so that people who are interested can just sign up. But as of right now, it's more of a, if you're interested, let us know, you get on the list.
Thank you.
One of our challenges is that, as was pointed out, a significant number of members who don't see it. We at a recent board retreat, we found that there were a number of board members that were unfamiliar with it and or don't see it, and that's really an oversight of the software, of getting you into the system, and you know, as this really is sort of the first year that we've made it as systematic as every week, really working on it. For those of you who do e-newses, as you know, doing one once a month can be quite a task. To do one every week, you're thinking of the topics, you're doing some research, finding some pictures, want to be relevant, want to be accurate, but also want to be timely and want to get out the door. And so it's quite a task. And when Doug said we started talking about doing this, I thought, well, every other week, and he said, every week, and very impressive, very impressive. We also came up with the, his recommendation that we have a monthly webinar. Well, those are also, quite a bit of effort to get people together and do it in a way that is valuable to you. So you'll spend 45 minutes to an hour over your lunch period watching it. And I think they've found a pretty good format for that, too. But if there is probably a weakness at this moment, it is that enough of the Water Congress members, particularly any depth in your own organizations, there might be 2 or 3 people in a lot of organizations that ought to get the e-news and don't. You have one membership, let's say, but you represent a utility or some other organization and they're an engineering company, whatever it is, and there ought to be 3 or 4 people that might get it or should get it. And we need to, through working with you, expand that. And then your final question was, obviously anybody can go to our website and see most of the information up there, except for some things that are behind a wall for member decision-making materials. All this is open to the public, right?
Yes.
So you're asking a question that we're sort of debating right now, and that is that if this is available and it's good and people are interested in it, should we make it? Should we get it to members of all the mayors, members of the municipal league, all the county commissioners, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, should we make it more? We find lots of Chamber of Commerce executives are interested in it. Should we make it more broadly available? The answer is probably yes. We just need to take that step.
Do we have any other questions? No? Okay, I say with that, we'll call it a day for now. End of theater session 1. We'll take a 15-minute break and then regroup for theater session number 2. Thank you, everybody. That was great. Thank you.